I'm a 27-year-old guy from Ohio, and I never really thought of myself as the successful type. I mean, I was always the quiet one growing up, the guy who got teased for being too awkward or too nerdy, the one nobody really took seriously in high school. My sister, on the other hand, was the golden child. Popular, loud, funny. She had this aura that made everyone naturally gravitate toward her. I loved her, don't get me wrong, but growing up in her shadow wasn't easy. So, 2 years ago, she got engaged, and the wedding was one of those big, fancy affairs in Cleveland. You know the type: crystal chandeliers, overpriced food, and a DJ who insisted on playing every 2000s banger possible. My sister insisted I be there, of course. I wouldn't have missed it for the world, but I also knew that the family dynamic at these events wasn't going to be easy for me. Her fiancé, let's call him Jake, was one of those guys who was effortlessly charming. Football player type, big personality, laughs that fill the room. And naturally, he had the same best man he'd known since middle school, a guy named Tyler. Now, Tyler didn't like me from day one. Not that he had a reason. It was more like he saw me as a permanent outsider, a lesser version of my sister's circle, the kind of guy who'd never have a life like theirs. During the reception, after the speeches, Tyler got up for the classic roast the groom moment. Everyone knew it was coming. These things are scripted, rehearsed, and expected to be funny. But when he got to me, the room's energy shifted. He pointed at me with this grin that was trying way too hard to be playful. "Don't worry," he said, loud enough for half the tables to hear. "He'll never get married. Nobody wants him." I remember the laughter, not just polite chuckles, but the kind that rings sharp and hollow in your chest when you know people are laughing at you, not with you. My sister gave me this apologetic smile, like she wanted to crawl under the table. The bride's friends giggled, half out of nervousness, half because that was the script they'd expected. And Jake, he just nodded along, awkwardly trying to smooth over the moment. I smiled, a real, slow smile that didn't reach my eyes. Because at that moment, I made a silent vow. Nothing outwardly dramatic. No shouting, no storming out, no confrontation. Just a quiet promise that one day, I'd have my moment. That smile wasn't weakness. It was patience. The rest of the night was a blur of dancing, fake happiness, and me watching Tyler drink himself into oblivion. He strutted around like a king, making jokes at everyone's expense, and I kept my distance. I knew my sister's wedding wasn't the place to fight anyone, let alone a guy who thrived on attention and intimidation. After the reception, I didn't even stick around for the late-night after-party. I left early, took a long walk through the city streets, and replayed that moment over and over in my head. Not out of anger, exactly. More like calculation. I knew I wasn't going to let that define me. Fast forward a few months, I finally started landing steady work at a law firm I'd interned at during college. Nothing fancy, but it was the first time I felt like I was building something on my own, without needing anyone's approval. Slowly, I realized that life wasn't about winning popularity contests. It was about creating leverage, about being ready for the right moment. And if Tyler thought that throwaway joke at a wedding would haunt me, he was in for a surprise. That's all for now. Just remember the quiet guy in the corner next time you try to humiliate him publicly. Sometimes, the quiet ones are the ones plotting the most. After that wedding, I didn't see Tyler again for a while, which was honestly fine by me. He wasn't the type of guy I wanted in my life. The thing is, in those months, I started realizing something important. People like him don't stay the same forever. They peak early, coast on charm, and think life owes them something because they were popular in high school or college. Meanwhile, the rest of us, quiet, underestimated, overlooked, get to build quietly, steadily, and sometimes the payoff is sweeter than anyone could imagine. I threw myself into my work. Law school had been tough for me, not because I wasn't smart. I was, but because I didn't have the kind of networking connections that some people do. I wasn't the kid whose dad knew a judge or whose uncle owned a firm. Every opportunity one got, I had to earn it from scratch. And slowly, I started seeing the results. Promotions, bigger cases, clients that actually respected my opinion. Confidence didn't happen overnight, but it grew, quietly, like a low flame that eventually burns everything in its path. Then, one day, about 6 months after my sister's wedding, I got a call from a new client. She was being divorced, and she needed a lawyer who would actually fight for her. That in itself wasn't unusual. I handled divorces all the time. But as soon as I saw her soon-to-be ex's name, my stomach dropped. Tyler. Tyler. The guy who had humiliated me in front of my sister's wedding guests. He had somehow managed to marry someone. And apparently, that didn't work out. For a second, I considered saying no. That seemed almost too easy, too convenient. But then I remembered that wedding, his smug face, the way he made me feel small. I told my client, confidently, I can take your case. Let's get this done right. I didn't mention who the guy was. That wasn't professional. But inside, I felt this strange mix of satisfaction and anticipation. As I started preparing for the case, I realized just how badly Tyler had underestimated people like me. He assumed everyone would stay small, quiet, invisible. He assumed charm and arrogance could carry him through life. But life has a way of balancing things. A person who spends years on self-centered behavior often ends up completely unprepared when the consequences finally catch up. And Tyler? He had no idea what was coming. I did my homework. Divorce cases, especially involving someone like Tyler, wealthy, loud, and attention-hungry, can be tricky. But I had one advantage. I wasn't distracted by ego. Every document I filed, every argument I made, every meeting I prepared for, it was calculated, precise, and purposeful. And each time I thought about that wedding, I felt a little more motivated. Not angry, not bitter, just focused. 2 months later, the court date was set. I walked into the building early that morning, wearing a dark suit that I actually liked for the first time in years. Not flashy, not over the top, just sharp. My client followed closely, nervous but trusting. And then I saw him, Tyler. Same smirk, same overconfident stance, same I own the world vibe. Only now, he looked tired, worn, a little more human. When he saw me walk in with his soon-to-be ex-wife, he froze. I mean, completely froze. It was one of those moments you can't fake, no matter how many acting classes you've taken. His face went white, like someone had turned off the lights. I offered a professional nod, shaking her hand firmly. That nod didn't just say, I'm here to do my job. It said, very clearly, remember that guy you thought would always be beneath you? Yeah, I'm standing here now. He tried to smile, tried to make small talk, tried to reassert that bravado he had relied on for years. But it was gone, somehow. He looked at me like he'd finally realized that the quiet, overlooked guy, the one who'd smiled at his wedding when he humiliated me, hadn't been invisible at all. The hearing itself was intense, but I stayed composed. I laid out every point meticulously, highlighting where he had overstepped legally, where he had failed to protect his spouse's rights, and where his arrogance had created openings we could use. He tried to interrupt, tried to charm the judge, tried everything he had always relied on. And every time, I countered calmly, confidently, without hesitation. By the time the judge made the preliminary rulings, I could see Tyler shrinking in real time. The guy who had laughed at me in front of half a wedding crowd now looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. It wasn't gloating, it wasn't revenge in the petty sense. It was poetic in a quiet way. Life had caught up with him, and I was simply the instrument making sure the consequences were unavoidable. After the hearing, my client hugged me, grateful and relieved. And Tyler? He didn't know what to say. I just nodded at him again, polite, professional, and unshakable. That was all he needed to see. No words, no drama, just me, standing there as the person he never expected to become something he couldn't ignore. After that first hearing, things got interesting. Tyler wasn't used to losing, and he especially wasn't used to being outmaneuvered by someone he had dismissed as insignificant. I didn't contact him directly, didn't gloat, didn't even really acknowledge him outside of the courtroom. But I could feel it. He knew I was a threat now, and that was exactly where I wanted him. Over the next few weeks, the divorce process moved fast. My client was meticulous and organized, and I made sure every detail was covered. Tyler tried all his usual tactics: charm the opposing counsel, play the victim, attempt to intimidate witnesses. But here's the thing. Intimidation doesn't work on people who have nothing to prove socially. I wasn't scared, and I wasn't reactive. I just prepared and executed, step by step. Watching him fumble was strangely satisfying. Not because I was cruel, but because it was a long overdue lesson in reality. One afternoon, I ran into him outside the courthouse. He had that same forced grin, the one that screams, I'm fine, everything's fine, while your body language says the exact opposite. Hey, he said, voice tight. You, you're the lawyer, right? I nodded, calm, neutral. Yes, and you must be Tyler. His smile faltered, just a little, and I could see him searching for a way to assert dominance. There wasn't one. Not in that moment. Look, he started. I think maybe we can, figure this out outside court. You know, settle. I gave a polite, professional smile. That's not my decision to make. My client's interests come first. Everything else is secondary. He swallowed hard, clearly frustrated. He wanted to fight, wanted to assert control, wanted to make me squirm. And instead, he got someone completely unflappable. Someone who had spent years being underestimated, mocked, and ignored. Someone who had quietly built up skill, confidence, and leverage without needing anyone's validation. I started noticing little things about him changing over the next few weeks. His calls became less confident, his emails more cautious. He stopped showing up to the office of his own attorney with that cocky swagger. The man who once made jokes at a wedding, publicly humiliating me for a laugh, was now watching every move, second-guessing every word, clearly shaken. It wasn't about ego anymore. It was about accountability. He had been operating under the assumption that the world would bend to his charm and status, and suddenly it didn't. Suddenly, there was a consequence to every misstep, every careless word, every thoughtless act. And he didn't like it. Not one bit. The day of the final hearing came, and it was surreal seeing him sit across from me, sweating under a suit that now felt just slightly too tight. My client was calm, collected, and prepared. And me? I was ready. I didn't need to make a spectacle. The work spoke for itself. I laid out everything: financial discrepancies, mismanaged assets, breaches of agreement, and every instance where his behavior directly impacted my client negatively. Each point was clear, concise, undeniable. Tyler tried to interrupt once. Just once. I didn't even flinch. The judge gave me the floor, and I delivered my next point with precision. The room was quiet, tense, and you could literally feel the shift in power. Tyler's usual bravado had evaporated. He looked around, realizing that everyone who had once laughed at me, the court staff, the judge, his own family, was now witnessing him lose ground. And he had no comeback, no charm, no escape. After the judge ruled largely in favor of my client, Tyler slumped back in his chair. His face was pale, tight with disbelief. It was subtle, but I caught it. The same expression you get when someone finally grasps that life doesn't owe them anything. That moment could have been satisfying in a petty sense, but honestly, it felt more like closure. 2 years of being mocked, overlooked, and underestimated finally balanced itself out. Not through confrontation, not through theatrics, but through quiet, calculated preparation and competence. Later, when the papers were signed and my client hugged me in relief, I caught Tyler's "I won last time." He didn't say anything, couldn't say anything, and for the first time, I think he truly understood what it meant to misjudge someone. The quiet kid at the wedding, the one who smiled instead of snapping back, the one everyone thought would never amount to much, that was me. And right then, he saw it clearly. Driving home afterward, I thought back to that wedding day, that exact moment when Tyler made his joke. I realized I hadn't thought about it much in the intervening years, not with bitterness, not with obsession, just as a quiet reminder. A reminder that underestimating someone because they're quiet, because they're not flashy, because they don't fit the mold of what you expect, is one of the biggest mistakes a person can make. Tyler would go on with his life, sure, but he'd remember. He'd remember the man he mocked, the one he assumed would always be less than, standing firm, capable, and ultimately victorious. And I didn't have to say a word. My work, my diligence, my preparation, they spoke louder than any insult he had ever thrown at me. I learned something in those months. Life isn't about immediate gratification or petty revenge. It's about being ready, being competent, and letting time reveal the truth. The guy who laughs at you today, maybe he won't be the one laughing in a few years. Maybe the quiet, overlooked, underestimated person is the one rewriting the story. And sometimes, watching it unfold in front of the person who once mocked you, that's the closest thing to sweet justice that doesn't feel petty. It just feels inevitable. After that final hearing, Tyler didn't speak to me directly, not once. But I could feel it, like a shadow following every move he made. People like him can't handle losing in front of witnesses, and losing to someone they once humiliated is, Well, it changes you. I didn't gloat, didn't post anything online, didn't brag to mutual friends. That wasn't the point. The point was proving, quietly, that underestimating someone has consequences. The weeks after the ruling were enlightening. Tyler tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, posting photos on Instagram pretending everything was fine, his usual charming smile plastered on for the camera. But I knew better. Every interaction I had with mutual acquaintances, every story that filtered back to me, painted the same picture: confusion, frustration, disbelief. He had this constant, underlying tension, like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I knew, from experience, that the shoe always lands eventually. I didn't seek him out, but one evening, I ran into him at a local coffee shop near the courthouse. He was with his sister-in-law, talking casually, or trying to. But the moment he saw me walk in, he froze. That familiar smirk was gone, replaced by this tight, forced expression. He glanced at my client, who was with me for a quick document review, and I saw it. Recognition. Understanding. A flash of panic, subtle but unmistakable. "Hey," he said, voice hesitant. You're still, working on her case?" I gave a polite nod. "Yes, it's ongoing. All handled professionally." He swallowed and looked down at his coffee cup, as if it could absorb him. "Right? Professional." "Yeah." He trailed off. I could tell he wanted to say more, but didn't know what. The arrogance, the charm, the easy confidence he had relied on for years, all of it was gone. It wasn't pride or revenge that got me satisfaction in that moment. It was just validation. A quiet acknowledgement that I had been right where I was meant to be, and he had underestimated me from the start. Over the next few months, I continued to handle the case with precision. Tyler tried small, passive-aggressive maneuvers, emails attempting to intimidate my client, minor objections during court discussions, casual brags to mutual friends. None of it worked. Every time, I countered calmly, methodically, without breaking stride. And with every failure, I could see the anxiety building in him. One day, his ex-wife called me. She was calmer than usual, confident that we had the upper hand, but also curious about Tyler's behavior. "He's different," she said. "Like he's lost some of that confidence. And it's terrifying him, I think. I've never seen him like this." I didn't comment, just listened. Inside, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Not because I enjoyed seeing someone falter, but because it validated the years of patience, the work, the quiet strategy. He had thought he was untouchable, and now he was learning, painfully, that life doesn't care about your ego. Then came the day of the final settlement meeting. The courtroom was tense, formal, and very, very quiet. Tyler walked in, and I swear I could see him counting his options, calculating every misstep he had made, and realizing how little room he had left to maneuver. His face went white the moment he saw me standing across the table, professionally dressed, calm, and fully in control of the room. I shook hands with his ex-wife as if we were old colleagues, and I could see it hit him like a punch. During the negotiation, I held nothing back, but not out of spite. Everything I said was factual, logical, supported by documentation and precedents. Tyler's usual tricks, charm, intimidation, guilt, fell flat. I could see him shrinking in his seat, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to maintain composure. I didn't even look at him while speaking. I looked at the judge, at my client, at the room. That way, Tyler couldn't manipulate the moment. He had lost his advantage, the assumption that his personality alone could dictate the outcome. By the time the judge signed off on the final settlement, Tyler was slumped in defeat. No dramatics, no shouting, no outburst, just silent, palpable loss. He'd been confident for years, sure of his life, sure of himself, sure of everyone else's place in the hierarchy. And in that quiet, professional, controlled courtroom, all of that confidence had crumbled. He had underestimated me, and the consequences were staring him right in the face. Walking out of the courthouse afterward, my client was beaming, relieved, finally free from someone who had manipulated and mistreated her. Tyler followed behind, distant, tense, clearly aware that he had been outmatched. The irony wasn't lost on me. The guy who had joked about me being unworthy of marriage at my sister's wedding now understood, in the most concrete terms possible, what it meant to be underestimated, mocked, and ignored, and then overpowered by the person he thought was insignificant. That night, driving home, I thought back to the wedding. That exact moment, Tyler's joke echoing in my memory, felt different now. Not bitter, not vengeful, just quiet satisfaction. Life doesn't always hand you instant gratification, and revenge in the conventional sense isn't nearly as satisfying as watching someone's arrogance meet reality while you stand unshakable, prepared, and calm. And I realized something else. Tyler wasn't my enemy in the end. He was a mirror, a reflection of what happens when you misjudge people, when you assume charm and popularity are enough to carry you through life. And me? I'm the guy who learned to wait, to prepare, to build quietly, to let the moment arrive when it was inevitable. The weeks after the final settlement were quiet, almost surreal. Tyler had vanished from the social circles he once dominated. Mutual friends would whisper things here and there, and from what I heard, he was struggling to regain any sense of normalcy. That's what happens when someone who thrives on charm and ego suddenly faces undeniable reality. You can't fake competence forever, and life doesn't hand out participation trophies. For me, life didn't change dramatically. I went back to work, continued building my career, and focused on relationships and projects that mattered. But every so often, I would think about him. The guy who joked about me at my sister's wedding. The guy who made me feel small and invisible. The guy who had assumed he was untouchable. And every time, I'd smile. Not out of malice, but because his downfall wasn't chaos. It was quiet. I didn't have to throw it in his face, and that's what made it even sweeter. A few months later, I ran into him at a local courthouse for a different case, unrelated to my client. He spotted me from across the hallway. His eyes widened, and I could see a flash of recognition, the same flash I'd seen the first time he noticed me during the divorce hearing. This time, it wasn't about fear of losing a case. It was a quiet, private acknowledgement that the world had shifted. I was no longer the guy he could dismiss, mock, or underestimate. I was a person he had misjudged entirely. He said something awkward, something like, "Hey, good to see you." His voice was low, tentative, not the booming, confident tone he'd always used to command attention. I nodded politely, gave a neutral smile, and that was it. No words were necessary. The message had already been delivered years ago, in court, in papers, in judgment, in quiet competence. It was funny, in a way, reflecting on the wedding. That single joke had been so sharp, so cutting at the time, and it had stayed with me longer than I realized. But looking back, it had done me a favor. It reminded me of what I wanted. Not to be popular, not to be flashy, not to conform to someone else's version of success, but to be capable, prepared, and ready for the moment when I could stand tall. And that moment had arrived, quietly, without spectacle, with results that spoke for themselves. Tyler's life wasn't destroyed. He had learned lessons the hard way, but he was alive, working, and somewhere beneath the arrogance and charm was a guy who now understood the meaning of humility, preparation, and respect. And me? I had gotten closure. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't plotted petty revenge. I had simply worked, prepared, and shown up. Sometimes that's all it takes to rewrite the story that someone else tried to write for you. Later, over coffee with my sister, she brought it up. "You know," she said, stirring her latte, "I never thought you'd handle that divorce case so flawlessly. I mean, Tyler, he had no idea what hit him." She smiled, and I could tell she wasn't just talking about court. She was talking about the guy who had always been quiet, the one people overlooked, the one she'd worried about being mocked and dismissed all those years. I shrugged. I didn't do it for him. I did it because I had to do it right. And, well, it's nice to see things work out the way they should. She nodded, understanding. "You've always been underestimated. But now, I think they all see it. You're not just the quiet guy anymore." And in that moment, I realized something. The best kind of victory isn't the one people see, isn't the flashy, loud one. It's the one where you keep building quietly, keep showing up, keep preparing, and then the moment comes, fully inevitable, fully undeniable, and you stand there, composed, competent, and completely unshaken. A few weeks later, I heard through mutual friends that Tyler had finally left Cleveland, moving for a new job opportunity. No Instagram posts, no announcements, just quiet. I didn't feel triumphal, didn't post anything online. I just thought, good. Hopefully he learned something. And that's the thing I want people to understand. Life has a way of teaching lessons. Sometimes it's direct. Sometimes it's subtle. And sometimes It's poetic in a quiet, almost imperceptible way. You don't need revenge in the conventional sense. No shouting, no viral posts, no drama. You just need patience, preparation, and the ability to show up when the moment matters most. I still see my sister occasionally. She's married now, happy, with that same effortless charm she's always had. But she looks at me differently now, like she finally sees the person I've always been, not the quiet kid in her shadow. And Tyler? He'll remember. That moment, that quiet competence, that inevitability. And that's enough. Because at the end of the day, the quiet ones, the ones who get mocked, laughed at, dismissed, sometimes they're the ones who rewrite the story entirely. And when that happens, there's nothing to say, nothing to post, nothing to announce. You just show up. And that, in itself, is the loudest statement of all. I don't know if Tyler will ever fully recover from that realization. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. But I know I did. And sometimes, that's the only victory that really matters.